Over 80 million Americans have cast their votes in the lead up to Election Day today, with all eyes on the 7 swing states, with both candidates hoping to do well in all. Vice President Kamala Harris is looking to make history as the first female president, while Trump wants to return to the White House. These are some of the live visuals there as we are seeing at West Palm Beach in Florida, where Donald Trump and his wife are expected to cast their votes. And Sharon Rice-Pease is outside a polling station in Manhattan in New York and is joined by Sean Jacobs, a professor in international relations at the New School University in New York. Now, Sharon, before we even come to you, we're watching live visuals here at West Palm Beach, which is in Florida, where Donald Trump is really looking to get the backing that he's always enjoyed from that particular state. But it's been quite the journey since the Biden-Trump debate in June, which saw Biden then withdraw and Harris start her campaign. Since then, it's been intense campaigning in key battlegrounds, and today the candidates are hoping to have done enough to secure the win.
Absolutely. The focus very much, Bongiwe, as you rightly frame it, on the swing states in the United States, your Wisconsins, your Michigans, your Pennsylvanias. But the first indication we're going to get about how this race might pan out, the trajectory, will be from the eastern seaboard swing states, your Georgias and your North Carolinas. That will be the first iteration of what might happen as we go late into the night here. So Georgia and North Carolina will be indicative of whether we might see a very tight race in this election, or whether we might see it lean, one way or the other. Is Harris going to surprise tonight, or is Donald Trump going to surprise tonight? Let me just talk a little bit about what's going on behind me. We were outside the polling station earlier here in central Manhattan. We are now inside one of the polling stations, so you'll see a lot of activity behind me. Let me just explain the process here. People walk into the polling station, they register, they register at the desk, they are verified in terms of their address. They then pick up a ballot. The ballot is not just a presidential race. It's Kamala Harris and Tim Walz versus Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. But in addition to that, there are senatorial races, federal senator races on the New York ballot, for example, and this might be emblematic of what is happening in other states. There are every single member of Congress, all 435 members of Congress, and about the third of the Senate are on the ballot. There are state supreme judges that are on the ballot, House of Representatives members, and sort of lower level government positions. So there are a number of issues that need to be addressed on the ballot. So people spend quite a little bit of time in these polling booths behind me. But to really get a broader perspective of how this election might play out, a historic election no less, we have the potential here of electing the first woman in the 248-year history of the United States. For more on this, let's talk to Professor Sean Jacobs, formerly of South Africa, but now of the United States.
I'm still South African.
He is a professor of international relations at the New School here, and the publisher and founder of the website Africa is a Country. If you haven't gone to that website, go and take a look at it. Prof, what's your assessment? They made their closing arguments overnight. Donald Trump was in Grand Rapids. Kamala Harris was on the steps where Rocky ran up the steps in Philadelphia in that famous movie, seeking to be the underdog in this race. What's your assessment?
I mean, this is, it's dizzying. I think this is probably like if you walk on the street, there's anxiety. People don't know what the result might be. On the Trump side, I think people assume that he'll come back, he'll fix the United States, because there's a sort of a sense of malaise. People feel terrible about COVID happened, but Trump was responsible for COVID. The economy was in doldrums under Trump, but there seemed to be some kind of disconnect on the side of his voters. At the same time, I don't think that Kamala Harris has made like a clear case. A lot of people feel that she could have been stronger on a number of issues, but I think her plan was, the point is to try to get the Republican voters, with these so-called swing voters, voters who say they're never Trumpers. And so it's up in the air. Unfortunately, we're also stuck with an electoral system that is archaic, in which some states count more than others. So you mentioned already there are these swing states. The fact that you have a democracy in which the popular vote doesn't count, and that it's up to only a few people in a select set of states, that is quite dizzying to me.
Let's talk a little bit about the gender gap. What we have seen in the early voting, some 75 million ballots cast before today, and the numbers broke this way. 54% of women showing up. We don't know how they voted, but 54% women and 44% men. Is that indicative of something? Should we read something into that? What do you say?
But I think the election has been characterized by misogyny. I mean, Trump openly has stated his hatred of women. I mean, when he was in power, he changed the law around abortion, changed the constitution, the constitutional amendment around abortion. So for a lot of women, the election matters. I think a poll came out right in the last couple of weeks from Iowa, which is a state that solidly usually goes to Republicans, and it was up in the air suddenly. So clearly the election is breaking on questions of gender. They found that men, including some black men, favor Trump. And so I think there is definitely a sense of misogyny, patriarchy, this idea that a woman cannot rule. You hear it even from women who vote for Trump. So I think that is a part of the election.
To what extent does this presidential outcome matter to a country like South Africa and maybe Africa largely? Does Kamala Harris matter in a different way to South Africa as opposed to a Donald Trump vis-a-vis South Africa? You know, South Africa will be chairing the G20 next year. So the real question is it going to be Kamala Harris going to South Africa or Donald Trump?
Both American presidential candidates are invested, I think, in American empire, in America first. They do it differently, different degrees. Trump is sort of, bombastic, over the top. Kamala Harris, as I like to joke, gives it to you in straight sentences. It actually, the sentences make sense. But they are America first. This is what they're about. If it doesn't work for the United States, then they'll go against it. If it comes to foreign policy, the parties are generally agreed. I do think, however, that there are sort of what you might call degrees matter. So Donald Trump, I think, isolationist. Probably Africa to him is about security, counterterrorism, the rivalry with China. Kamala Harris will continue, for me, a lot of what Biden has done. So it's a lot of beautiful rhetoric, but it's generally some of the same stuff. Except I think it will come. Kamala Harris, her father is Jamaican. Her mother's father or uncle spent time as a diplomat in Zambia. So there's a real connection there. And I think she'll continue the way that the Democrats have dealt with South Africa.
Talk a little bit about the anxiety. Let's dig a little bit deeper into the anxiety and the stress a lot of people are feeling. Of course, January 6, 2021 will be front of mind to many Americans, to many people who live here, who observed the chaos on that day. There is concern that Donald Trump might declare victory early on the night as he did in 2020. What could that mean, just given how engaged everyone is and how on the edge of everything everybody is?
I mean, it is worrying. He tried it the last time. He asked, because of the way that the system works, the president is not directed directly, as you said. There's this weird system called the Electoral College, in which states appoint people who then vote, an election gets certified. And Donald Trump tried to use that system by even trying to call in the army to stop the counting. He had electors trying to change the results. And then, as we know, it went to a point, there was, as you pointed out, the violence on January 6th. But there is also something, I think, I don't know if it will work this time, but last time it did. The American legal system worked. Many of those people were arrested. Some went to jail. They've tightened up some of the electoral laws. In some states now, it's the governor that has to certify elections rather than these electors.
So how do you expect the night to go, right? We talk a little bit about how Georgia and North Carolina would be indicative of the process that might unfold. The polling indicates a very tight race, but the margin of error is between 2% in some polls and 5%, and that sort of overshadows the tightness or the slim margins here. How do you see it going? Do you see it going one way or the other, or is this going to be a tight race until the end?
The problem with American elections is that you cannot judge an election based on rallies, because the question is who goes to the polls. I mean, if we've seen here this morning, it's kind of slow. It's older people. As I said, the polling from Iowa suggests that there's a swing from older voters towards Kamala Harris. So definitely younger people who seem to be very pro-Trump, they may not vote. In many parts of the country, they make it difficult. The American elections seem to be about making it difficult for people to vote. So many of these factors, I think, are going to play out as the night goes on. There's also this element in which they do not have an independent electoral commission like we have in South Africa, where people wait for the results. There's a certain kind of consensus.
A centralization.
There's a centralization of the outcomes. Each state has its own electoral system. In some states, certain categories of people cannot vote. So those are all these. That's why I said at the beginning, it's dizzying. And there's so much anxiety around the election because they haven't even fixed the way they run elections.
Yeah, final question for you. The legal jeopardy that Donald Trump faces were he not to win this election, right? There are a number of indictments, federal indictments, the classified documents one is going through the appeals process. There's a state case in terms of the racketeering and insurrection in the state of Georgia. This election matters more to Donald Trump than people think, right?
I mean, some people have suggested if you've listened to him in the last couple of days, he sounds sort of nostalgic. There's a certain kind of a sense of like this might be the last run, and then he'll have to face all these cases. But Donald Trump, for people who live in New York City, Donald Trump is a slippery character. I don't think he's ever gone to jail for any of the things that he's been accused in New York City.
Right.
So again, it's up to what happens after the election, whether there is a very aggressive push by New York State's Attorney General against him.
Prof, thanks for coming out. Who did you vote for?
I voted on Friday, and I voted for Kamala Harris. Yeah. Straight down the line, Democratic.
He got there eventually. Professor Sean Jacobs, Professor of International Relations at the New School in New York City. It's a university. And of course, the publisher and founder of Africa is a Country, africaisaCountry.com. Go check it out. A view from someone who grew up in South Africa, so a little bit of a balancing act here by Professor Jacobs. Bongiwe, back to you.
All right, Sean Brass piece there outside, in fact, inside this time, a polling station in Manhattan, in New York. And there are live visuals that we're showing you a little earlier on in Florida. And that's where presidential hopeful Donald Trump and his wife Melania will be casting their votes in Florida, a state that once was a swing state, but now it seems to be fully Republican. So these are live visuals there, and a lot of young people, of course, going to also really just, take their issues to the ballot. And there are concerns around the storm as well that could possibly dampen the mood there. So certainly we'll continue to bring you more of these live visuals.